Well, I was really surprised this year at how good some of the soybeans were on our farm. We averaged about 65 bushel beans, and we had one field, it was a little over 80 acres, I think 83 acres, that averaged 75.25 bushels per acre.
That's not too bad. That's not too bad. You know, especially with the market price this year, that'll probably pencil out for us. We may plant soybeans again next year.
So we wanted to talk today just a little
Being
bit
a little
about,
sarcastic.
a little about some of the lessons that we learned this year. And we've been talking about this quite a bit this fall, about seed treatments and things like that. But we wanted to get into that just a little bit more, especially when it comes to fertility for soybeans, because that's where I think farmers across the United States kind of fall down. When you look at some of the statistics, and we've actually taken numbers from the USDA and looked at how farmers are doing with their soybean crop in terms of what they're fertilizing with and what they're removing from the soil. And what we find is that the average US soybean farmer is removing more fertility than what he's putting out there for the soybean crop, and yet farmers wonder why their corn yields are going up at a faster rate than their soybean yields. So this same exact thing was happening on our own farm, where we weren't doing a good enough job with soybean fertility until just a few years ago. Since we started stepping that up, we have seen our soybean yields continue going up, up, up. And I mean, yeah, it's not as glamorous as the corn thing, where you can say, oh, I got 200 bushel corn or whatever. You know, I'm only going to gain an extra 5 bushels on soybeans, but with $10 beans, that's a lot of money.
Well, it is, but soybeans are the second crop. If you're a wheat farmer, well, I'll plant some soybeans for a rotation. If you're a corn farmer, I'll plant some soybeans for a rotation. That's the problem,
A cotton
Brian.
farmer. I mean, yeah, all over the country, it seems like soybeans are this forgotten crop.
I just don't get it. And it seems like the fertility programs are, well, here's my 2-year program. I'll put it out on my favorite crop, and then hopefully there's carryover from my beans. Well, there isn't, because our yields have gone up so much on our other crops, and they've gone up on the beans.
Well, I think one of the things with soybeans and why people tend to forget about the fertilizer side is because soybeans don't need a lot of nitrogen. They're able to produce their own nitrogen. But you know what? Soybeans can't produce their own phosphorus. They can't produce their own potassium. They can't produce their own sulfur. These are things that should be added every single time you're planting soybeans. And don't think, oh, hey, I'm just going to over-fertilize my corn, because what we find around the country is that's not happening either. If you look at the statistics, the American farmer is not over-fertilizing his corn. In fact, in some cases, in many cases, he's under-fertilizing the corn. There's nothing left over going into that soybean crop, no extra that's carrying forward. So you've got to fertilize your soybeans.
Well, the other thing that you left out there, Brian, is micronutrients. And micronutrients are very important in soybeans, whether it's for nodulation, whether it's for pod set, whether it's for flowering. There are many different functions in that soybean plant's life where micronutrients are very critical. So getting that fertility portion right on the micro side is awesome in soybeans as well. With our beans, we're seeing a response when we're putting out micronutrients across all our fields, and part of the reason is our corn is taking a lot of that out of the ground as well. But it is a responsive nutrient application.
Well, the thing when Darren says that, though, is I'm going to disagree a little bit, because
of course you are.
Well, it doesn't happen every year. That's the thing with soybean fertility. We'll find when we do some strips, there are some years we gain nothing, but then there are other years we gain 15 bushels. Well, by the time you average that out, we're gaining something all along the way, plus we're building our fertility up, or at least maintaining our fertility level, so when we go into our corn fields or when we go into wheat, then we aren't hurt there as well. So you've got to look at this whole thing as a long-term deal. You can't deplete your soils and expect to continue getting higher and higher yields, or even staying flat in terms of yield. You got to look at fertility. And the reason why we're talking about it so much today is we've had an early harvest. In fact, the earliest harvest we've ever had in terms of corn on our farm. We finished so early, and you're probably in the same boat. You've got time to do fall fertility, or at least plan out what you want to do for spring fertility right now. So take a hard look at this thing. Don't just say, well, I'm going to fertilize my corn, I'm going to fertilize my wheat, and forget about soybeans. We would strongly encourage you to take a look at that soybean thing. You too can get very high soybean yields, but you've got to feed those plants.
Well, hold on, Brian. You're talking like fertility is the only thing that we're doing.
Yeah, that's
on
because
this
it's
crop.
the most neglected thing for most people.
Well, that's nice, but it's not a silver bullet. There are a number of small things that we're also doing on fields like this that are being successful. You're using inoculant every time we're planting soybeans. It's really worth the money. We're also using a good seed treatment like Innovate to protect us from early season insects and also diseases. We're doing other things in the field too, like treating fungicide later in the season to protect against late season diseases, which we had a number of them this year.
That was a big deal.
There's many different things. Good weed control. There's just a lot of little steps that aren't really sexy things, but they're just all important in their own right.
And soybean aphid control. Don't listen to the people that are going to tell you 200 250 aphids per plant, that's ridiculous. You've got to spray way earlier on soybean aphids. We do on our farm. If you're spraying early for soybean aphids, you're going to get better yield. So you've got to take a look at all these things, and it's just not one thing. To Darren's point, there is no silver bullet here. It's a whole bunch of little steps and attention to detail, and we're treating soybeans like it's our first crop, not like it's a second crop or a forgotten crop. And I'm not going to say that we're going to have 65 bushel average soybeans every year or anything like that. Certainly we had pretty good weather this year. That was definitely a factor. But besides that, you've got to try for good yield if you want good yield.
Well, you just think about weed control too, and the timing of that weed control. You can't wait till the weeds are 6 inches or a foot or 2 feet tall. You've got to get out there early, use a pre-emerge herbicide. That's always meant more yield for us. And then coming back with your application of your post product, whether it's Roundup or Liberty or Ignite or a conventional product, you've got to get back out there timely, like 3 to 4 weeks after you plant, so those weeds don't kill your yield as well.
Yep, and speaking of weed control, our Weed of the Week is coming up next.